Hope has a price. Nick Prasad has always enjoyed a quiet life in the shadow of his best friend, child prodigy, and technological genius, Joanna Johnny Chambers. But all that is about to end. When Johnny invents a clean reactor that could eliminate fossil fuels and change the world, she awakens primal evil ancient ones set on subjugating humanity. From the oldest library in the world to the ruins of Nineveh, hunted at every turn, they will need to trust each other completely to survive. Hi, I'm Ben, and welcome to my review corner. Today we're going to be having a look at Beneath the Rising, written by Premier Mohammed. This book was released in 2020. As with last time, we're going to split this into 5 main sections, starting with story, before moving on to world building, characterization, writing style, and ending with some final thoughts and whether or not I recommend this book. So, without any further ado, let's just get straight back into it. The tale is told from the point of view of Nick, who is very much a normal, everyday guy, late teens, living at home with his family. He's made the decision to not move away and go to college, instead to help focus on helping looking after his younger siblings and helping his mum. He's the protagonist of the story. Everything is told from his point of view. On top of that, you have his close friend, Johnny Chambers. They've been friends since childhood. Johnny is the polar opposite on many ways. Whereas Nick is very much the normal, everyday person, Johnny is an auteur and a genius to boot, and has many inventions that have revolutionised the world. Also of note, this is an alternative reality story set just after 9/11. However, in this universe, the 9/11 incident was not successful. So basically, Johnny turns up unannounced, as is the norm from what we can tell. They meet up, everything seems to be going normally, and they see something while they're out. Not sure what it is. Johnny is spooked, goes back home. It turns out that Johnny has managed to invent, somehow, from stuff in his house, a clean, renewable and powerful source of energy that's limitless. Basically in a lunchbox. And this has garnered the attention, or appears to have done at least, of these creatures from beyond the dawn of time. What then ensues is a race against time across the world to find information about these creatures and how to stop them getting hold of the technology, which would allow them to open a door into their realm, allow them to come through and enslave humanity. It sounds like a pretty bog standard build of a sci-fi book where science has gone too far without oversight. However, there are several twists and turns in this book which are actually pretty well done and actually subvert some of the things that go on quite well, which actually elevate this above a normal standard. So I would say personally, I found the story to be quite good, especially with the twists and turns that are in here. So that leads us neatly into world building. So this book does a couple of things really well, and a couple of things on a very basic level. In terms of the very basic level of what it does, the actual descriptive work for the environments and the places they visit are solid, but not spectacular. They give you a base level of detail, but they don't really go anywhere beyond that. Another thing this book does, which is a little bit better, is it makes it clear in subtle ways that this is not the same timeline that we currently exist in, and that this world is similar but different to that which we currently inhabit. Things like mentioning past events that have occurred differently, or how technology is different, largely due to Johnny in this instance, who has rewritten the entire book of science at this point. All this makes it clear that this is not the same world that we live in. Where this book gets considerably better is as they're jet setting around the world and studying ancient tomes and books and sources of information. The history that is provided and shown in there goes so far back and does a really good job of fleshing out the threat that is the central core of this book and what they're trying to prevent, and how far back this conflict goes in humanity's history, and on that side of it, it's really well done and actually adds a great deal to the story. A final thing I want to point out is that this book does lightly touch on aspects of gender identity, as you would expect with Johnny. It also touches on homophobia, sexism, and racism in several places in the book. It is well handled, and also in its key points also adds to the plot, so it's not just thrown in. Overall, I'd say the world building here is pretty solid, but not spectacular, but there are some real highlights. So that takes us next into the characters, and this is the central driving force of this story. As already mentioned, this focuses from the point of view of Nick, and initially, and after talking to a couple of other people who've read the book, a few people really did not like this character. They found him whiny and moany, and I can certainly see that in the early stages of the book. However, the further in you get, the more you realise is that his point of view is the normal, everyday view when attached to the counterpoint that is Johnny, the special, gifted, super genius child that is changing everything we understand about the world. You get to understand the sense of responsibility that Nick has that's almost crushing down on him, both towards his family and to Johnny the further the book goes in, and how over his head that he is in the situations that he ends up being put in after being plucked from his normal everyday life to jet setting around the world, being chased by monsters and people that want to just annihilate the world. On the flip side of that, you have Johnny, who's very much written in such a manner that he's very socially awkward, he can't cope with people, he doesn't understand the social cues of the world, but he's brilliant and he wants to make the world a better place. But also, because it's from Nick's point of view specifically, there are massive blind spots in the story, especially towards Johnny, which contribute to certain twists later on in the story. However, the drawback for this being so hyper-focused on the two main characters is that the supporting cast get little to no time. There's maybe two characters outside of Nick and Johnny in the entire book that get any significant time within the book, and unfortunately it suffers from that. But the writing of Nick and Johnny and the banter they have together after being friends for so long feels genuine, and you can sense their affection and love for each other, even when they're going through stages of immense disagreement and arguing about all aspects of life, and you actually get that there's a deep emotional connection there. And that is one of the points that really elevates this book, is their relationship. The character work on those two is exceptional, and I don't think that can be stated enough. I do wish there was a little bit more fleshing out of side characters, however, but what is there is solid and serviceable beyond the main two. So, in terms of writing style, this book comes in at a little over 450 pages, so has plenty of space for the characters to breathe. As already mentioned, it is taken from a first-person perspective of the everyman that is Nick, and this actually helps colour the world around them. There's a lot of stuff that goes on which he just doesn't understand, and that isn't always explained to us as a reader. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I have heard some criticism of this, saying that there's some scientific jargon in here that they didn't understand, but you are reading this from Nick's point of view, which is kind of the point. He is so in over his head. And actually, I think that's a real strength, where it doesn't feel the need to explain stuff that the character that you're reading as wouldn't understand either. In terms of pacing and plot, again, initially this appears to be a relatively generic sci-fi story with some horror elements, but it does have some major twists in there, and they actually really elevate the story here, and they are quite well done as well. They are foreshadowed very gently, but they're not obvious. It doesn't telegraph what's going on at all points, and then when that's built upon later on, it kind of comes out of left field, but it makes complete sense. In terms of pacing of this book, this does have a couple of issues. The first 100 pages, maybe a bit less of this book, I found a real slog to read, and a friend of mine did not reach page 100 when reading this book, which is, I think, a massive shame. The best way to describe this is a bit like a roller coaster. You set off, it's nice and it's calm, and you're going up slowly to the top of the roller coaster, and it's not exciting at that point. You don't know what's coming next, and it's just a slow crawl. Then it hits the top, and then the thrills really start. And once this book kicks in, it becomes a non-stop, pacey charge around the world. And it's really good when it does this. As already mentioned, there are a few issues as well with some of the descriptive works, and some of the side characters are nowhere near as fleshed out. But this is a very competently written book, and again, this is a totally absorbing focus on the two main characters, especially as told from Nick's point of view. And the character work really carries this book through, along with the breakneck pacing that it actually uses in the latter half of the book in particular, as they race against time, and you can actually feel that there is a race on here, and if everything fails, then that's it for humanity. Another thing to mention is this book does actually have a natural conclusion. It does cut away a bit, so you don't see a big chunk of what goes on, as Nick isn't present. And again, that's fine, it leaves some questions there, but it has a conclusive finish. However, this has since been turned into a trilogy of books as a recording of this, and there is plenty of scope there to further view these characters and see what goes on after this, and I am personally interested to see where that will go. My final impression of this book is that this is a decent book. It's a contemporary sci-fi with horror elements, and once you get past the first 100 pages or so and the story takes the brakes off, this becomes a must read in terms of the sheer pace and the race against clock around the world, and it is really propped up by the writing of its two main characters. I cannot praise enough how well written they are and how much of an emotional connection you can read into each other. I do recommend this book. I will give this a 4 stars out of 5. I think anybody who enjoys contemporary fiction or has some interest in eldritch horror and Cthulhu-like mythology would find something to love here, and I'm really interested to see where this series goes next. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed my review, and I'll see you next time.